Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Well, congratulations to us, Antonia.
Yes.
We have made it to the end of another 16-part series of all the, well, I guess we haven't made it to the end of this episode,
Right.
but we're starting the end of the 16-part series. This is our last episode of all 16 personality types, talking about how each one can show themselves love using the lens of their personality. And this week, the final type we find ourselves at, the ESTP personality type, and how ESTPs can show themselves love.
Yeah.
Now, ESTPs aren't really a huge audience for us. Like there's not a ton of ESTPs in our world. I don't think there's a lot of ESTPs into type or personality types as much.
I suspect that there's more than we all know.
They're just secretly hiding in the shadows.
Well, I think that there might be some people who have ESTP preferences that believe they're of a different type.
Gotcha.
Because the way that ESTPs are characterized in a lot of profiles and descriptions and, how people talk about them resonates with a percentage, but not all of them. I think people undervalue how varied ESTPs can be.
Yeah, not all ESTPs are military special ops, skydivers, and like Olympians, right? Like there's a bunch of different variants of ESTP, but sometimes you read online and it seems like that's the caricature or stereotype applied to them.
Well, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, a lot of type content is made and traditionally has been made by people with I and J preferences. Like INTJs and INFJs tend to be the ones who get really into these systems. So it would make sense that there would be a little bit of a mystery around the other side.
Yeah. And
not an attempt to, or not an intention of oversimplifying them, but just as it's hard to describe the other.
Yeah.
So I think none of it's been intentional, but regardless, it's been the result. And so I think there are quite a few people with ESTP preferences who, they think they're ENTPs or, some other type. But I think, anyway, you're not wrong. Professed ESTPs are not the biggest part of our audience, but I do suspect that those numbers might be skewed.
Two things. When an ESTP is interested in personal growth and personality types, they're usually very interested. Mm-hmm. They like to go way down the rabbit hole just like anyone else that's interested. So even if it's a smaller representation, it's usually a lot of the qualitative nature is high if the quantity isn't there. And then number two, it'd be easy to go, well, ESTPs, not a big audience. Let's just abbreviate this podcast. We won't have a lot of people listening to it, but we're going to give it its proper due. We're going to do exactly what we do with everybody else. We're going to go just as deep into everything. So whether you're an ESTP and you want to learn more about showing yourself love, you're going to learn a lot about your personality type today, as well as the ways that you can use your personality to express and receive love from yourself. And if you're not an ESTP, you're going to learn a lot about this type. And if you have an ESTP in your life, it's going to be really an incredible attunement, I think, for you to see how they can show themselves love. Plus, we're going to pull a principle out for all the other 15 types, like we've been doing for every episode. So stay tuned at the end. We've got a principled phrase we want to share with you that I think you're going to resonate with. And it's a really great learning that we're going to take away from that. Okay. Couple premises, though, we got to lay down for this. Mm-hmm. Self-love. Here's the big premise we're coming from, and then Antonia, you're going to fill in all the little details. The big premise is that love is freely given to people. Like when we love someone, if it's a relationship we have with someone else, if we have requirements on that love, it's not really free love. It's conditional love. And we don't believe that that's genuine love. Genuine love is freely given without any requirements for that love to be given.
Well, and I don't even think it's like a should statement. Like it should be unconditional. Sure. I just think that's how it works.
Yeah.
Like when we love somebody, let's say we're in a relationship and the relationship ends, it's not like you just go, oh, I guess I don't love that person anymore.
Right.
Like we can't help it. We continue to feel love for the person.
That's right.
So love is not really earned, right? Like we just end up feeling love, and particularly for ourselves.
But people do this all the time. They say, I'll love you if you, and then fill in the blanks in relationship. And what they're actually saying is the relationship has conditions on it. Mm-hmm. And so this is where it gets dirty or messy is we're trying to send love, but there are conditions for relationships. So that love is freely given, but the relationship has parameters and conditions for it. Otherwise, you're not in a relationship. That's what breaking up is. Even after you break up, like to your point, you can still love that person, want to express love, but now there's no channel for it to fall on because you're no longer in a romance with them or whatever. Applies to friends, family, everything. So that's the meta frame. And we're basically saying, well, just like with another person, that's the same relationship you have with yourself. Mm-hmm. If you have a good relationship with yourself, you're going to receive the love you're trying to send. If you don't have that great of a relationship with yourself, if your relationship is messy, you may not be able to receive the love you're attempting to send all the time. So that's the meta frame that we're coming from. We have a couple more principles to lay down too on following that.
Right. So I guess the easy way of saying it, and this is sort of the truncated sort of soundbite version, is self-love isn't earned, but a good relationship with ourselves is.
Yeah.
So we do need to earn a good relationship with ourselves. And like you just hinted at, we're always trying to send ourselves love, right? There's a signal or a channel of love that we're always trying to send ourselves, but we don't always receive that love. And it's usually because we've set up obstacles or obstructions to receiving that love. And one of the premises of this particular series is that one of the best ways to remove some of those obstructions or obstacles so we can receive the love we're sending ourselves is to set the proper expectations for, we'll just basically set proper expectations for ourselves. If we set too low of expectations, we find ourselves being disappointed in ourselves because we know we could do more. So when we set low expectations in areas that we could excel, we become a little complacent. We don't really build self-confidence through that. On the flip side, if we set too high expectations for ourselves, we become demoralized when we can't reach them. So what we're going to do in this particular episode is we're going to walk through how people with ESTP preferences can set appropriate expectations. High expectations where they can perform so that they don't become disappointed in themselves, and reasonable expectations in areas that would otherwise be a hard lift, and so they don't become demoralized.
So one of the best ways to look at your mind as an ESTP is we're gonna look into our ESTP owner's manual for your personality type. Now, we've made one of these for all of the 16 types. I recommend it. I couldn't recommend it more for each personality. It's not just information. It's designed to help you act upon the information with advice and things you can do in your life to set up your life better for career, relationships, self-identity, and worldview. So it goes way deeper into what we're going to talk about today on the show. But in that owner's manual, we have a framework. It's just a metaphor to look and see your cognition. We call it the car model of personality. Every personality type has one. And for you as an ESTP, we're going to go through what this looks like for you so you can follow along in case you don't have that up in front of you from the owner's manual. But I recommend going and getting that because there's a lot more learning in it. So imagine your mind as an ESTP is a 4-passenger car. You have a driver, a co-pilot up front driving the car, and then the co-pilot sitting next to them, navigating through space. And then in the back seat, you've got a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old driving down the highway of your life. And this represents your mindset, your mentality, your cognitive functions is what it's technically called. So in the driver for ESTP is a cognitive function we've nicknamed sensation. Its technical name is extroverted sensing. And by the way, I'm going to go through all of these and broad brush them just real quick, cursory. This is not comprehensive at all. And I'm not going to get super detailed. I'm just going to hit them so you can follow along as we talk about self-love. So sensation's your driver. This is how you see the world. It's all about the eternal now of the present moment. Tuning into the single perspective that is this moment in life right now. What are you experiencing? What are you seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, experiencing in this moment? Not trying to see it from any other perspective, but what's happening right here. And so this function often is attuned to things like the environment around it, the stimulants and the environment that's happening around it. It's tuned into things like timing and people's body language and what's actually happening in this moment. What are the noises I'm hearing? What are the sights I'm seeing? What are the things I'm smelling? What's going on? It's tuned into present moment experience. Whether that's high octane, really intense adrenaline-filled activity or a quiet moment of, sitting by the campfire camping and just being reflective and hearing the crickets in the woods. Like both of those are highly attuned in the moment experiences. Online, you'll see a lot of people talk about the high octane, the high adrenaline activities, but this function's just as tuned into the more subtle moments as well, the subtle taste, the subtle experiences. So that already, just understand that's where you are as an ESTP showing up to life. And this really has a ton of energy behind it. And it's the way you perceive your world and it drives everything forward. So that's good news. Right next to that is the co-pilot. This mental process helps round out your personality in a very powerful way. We call it accuracy. That's the nickname we've given it. Its technical name is introverted thinking. This is all about internal logical consistencies. Thought, data, analysis, what makes sense, depersonalized from your own feelings or anyone else's feelings. Like what does the math say? what are the facts, ma'am? That's really the question it is. What is logical and what makes sense to me? And I'm sure as an ESTP, you can already see your struggle in the world because not everyone thinks this way. Not everyone thinks about, oh, it has to make logical consistency. I'm not a person that has to match up in my head logically. I have other operating things that are going on for me. So this can be a challenge only in your response you get from the world, but it's not a challenge for you and your personality. In fact, this is some of the best part of you. Not only is there a ton of skill and competence you can build here, but this co-pilot acts as a translator for all the best parts of you to be able to talk to all the more challenging or more uncertain parts of you. So this is almost like the keystone of your personality. It's so important. And we're going to spend some time talking about this. And if you go to the owner's manual for ESTPs, we spend a lot of time talking about the co-pilot. Growing this part of you, you get the biggest bang for the buck. You get the biggest return on investment of focusing on this part of your cognition. So that's the good news. This, the two parts of you in the front seat. Let's talk about sitting behind the co-pilot is a 10-year-old process, technically called extroverted feeling. We call it harmony. It's about getting harmony in the outer world with people, right? So humans and all the interactions with humans, this part of you is tuned into what that looks like. What's going on between people? It's looking at the social fabric and the interactions between, relationships of people, whether that's an entire group or just two people in a dynamic. And, a 10-year-old part of you have some proficiency in this. You might have to build a lot of skill here depending on your career. So you're going to have a weird relationship with this, kind of an on again, off again relationship with this part of yourself, but it's important to you. And it really matters to you that you can showcase to the world that you get what's going on, the vibe between people, the energy. You get what brings like a group down or what makes them feel awkward or weird or what creates discord in a situation. Like you understand that. You can help facilitate it not being that way.
Or what's fun.
Yeah. What people enjoy doing together, right? Getting in the vibe, the party atmosphere and all this. And so that's that 10-year-old part for you. And then the 3-year-old part is a process that we have nicknamed perspectives. Technical name is introverted intuition. If your driver of sensation is all about the eternal now, the present moment, what's happening from your single perspective, this is the opposite of that. This is when a situation is happening, this part of your brain has the capacity, not always that you do it, but it has the capacity almost to disconnect from your body and float above the scene and look at this from a meta or abstract viewpoint, like a bird's eye view of the situation. Not only that, but it can also shift into other people's perception or perspective of that situation. We call it perspectives for this reason. So you can say, well, what would that person over there be thinking or believing? And that person over there. And then maybe as a group, what are they all thinking or believing based on the scenario that's happening? Not my single perspective, but what's in their head? What's the narrative going on in their mind? What are they perceiving is happening here? And this is a really important part of you. This relies on intuition and imagination to do that. You can't actually know what that person's seeing or perceiving. So you approximate it. You say, well, if I was them, this is kind of maybe the perspective I could see them having. So you have a speculative nature to this part of you. But because it's a 3-year-old in its certainty, you're not going to feel good about going here all the time or leaning on it in a heavy way to ensure that, you're able to show up with this without feeling that uncertainty. And so even if you've built skill in your 10-year-old or your 3-year-old, that uncertainty is always going to be prevalent. And because of that, you can have a challenge with self-love because you're uncertain about these two parts of yourself. So as we talk about this car model, we're going to talk about each of these in descending order, and we're going to talk about the certainty of each. And what are the proper expectations we can have for each one of these? Because if we have too high expectations or too low expectations, that's going to erode or undermine our ability to show and receive love with ourselves.
Right. So the reason why certainty is such a good way of describing our relationship to each of these functions, particularly in the context of self-love and, removing obstructions, is the more certain we feel. Like as humans, we love the feeling of certainty. If something feels certain, it's like green lights all the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When we feel uncertain about something, though, it's like an immediate red flag. Even if that thing is fine, just the fact that we feel uncertainty means that we're like, okay, there might be a problem here. Like, let's throttle action. So the functions that we're pre-wired to feel the highest degree of certainty in, which is the driver and the co-pilot, we can set high expectations for them because there's nothing throttling our ability to develop them. There's nothing telling us that there's a problem. There's nothing, there's nothing corroding our relationship to those functions other than a lack of use. So the more certain we feel in the function, the higher our expectations can be around that function. Whereas when we feel uncertainty, well, every time we use a function or do an activity that makes us feel uncertain, there's a holding back energy. There's a pause that we tend to go, okay, well, I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing here. And so just the fact that there's that throttling, pausing energy means that we're going to not build as much capacity as we would if it was that sensation or that feeling of all green lights. So we have to set our expectations accordingly. So, so as we go through here, I might not necessarily talk about the degree of certainty we feel specifically, but just know, like you said, this is a descending order of certainty.
Absolutely. So let's get into that driver of sensation. I'm going to push back a little bit, Antonia, and say, you're like, there's nothing here that could tell us we don't have high expectations for this part of ourselves. I would say that is not true for the ESTP. An ESTP listening right now has gotten the message. I bet a lot of ESTPs listening gotten the message. This is not okay to have this part of yourself be too represented. It disrupts things. You're impulsive. You're too energetic. Sit down, stop moving. Why are you touching that? Don't do that. Right. Pay attention to your studies, like whatever. As a kid, I'm sure this ESTP that's listening is like, yeah, that has been my experience, Joel. You're right. So, and I'm not trying to conflict with what you said. What you mean by that is for yourself, there's no obstruction within the self to have high expectations.
Right.
You might get messages from the world, but for you, this function can have very high expectations as your driver.
Exactly. Yes. So high expectations for extroverted sensing or sensation is it's high degrees of responsiveness and adaptability. As we mentioned, the core of this function is about being present in an experience, in a moment.
Yeah.
And so being flexible and adaptable, being aware, being vigilant to opportunities, and I would say that really making sure that the instrument that is having these experiences, the instrument of the body, is taken care of, so that you can be as adaptable and really sort of suck the marrow out of life, right? To be able to enjoy new things and to be able to to play and to have this very sensory experience of life. Have your expectations set high for how you're going to do all of that. So a piece of this is, as I mentioned, a high expectation for the instrument that the body is. So this would be the opposite of, say, being overindulgent. It would be, taking care of your health, taking care, like we all start at different places health-wise. Some people have pre-existing conditions. Some people have the capacity to get to peak, healthy performance. But regardless of wherever you started, do everything you can to keep that instrument operating well. Like dial in good processes for maintaining your body. So this is exercising regularly. It's eating nutritious foods. It's not overindulging in, in substances. It's making sure that the thing that is having this experience is as calibrated as it can be. So that's having a high expectation. Another one is being aware, being vigilant. And I don't mean vigilant to problems. I mean vigilant to the circumstance or scenario. Opportunities come all the time. And people with extroverted sensing or sensation are maybe the best at spotting opportunities. They're fabulous at doing so.
Yeah.
And so when an opportunity arises, you want to be ready. What is the phrase? Luck favors the prepared. So you want to be prepared so that when luck shows up, you're able to jump on it. And so being aware of opportunities in behalf of yourself. This is how it's an act of self-love. It's not just seeing opportunities, it's feeling that you are worthy to jump on them, that you are able to capitalize on them for yourself. That's why the opposite can obstruct self-love. You see an opportunity, but you didn't jump on it, you let it go by. And it usually is a symbol that you thought you weren't worthy of it, or that was too good for you, or that you didn't have the self-confidence for it. But if you jump on it, that's a symbol back to yourself that, no, I take these opportunities. I'm an assertive person. I'm able to do that. And so that shows a high degree of expectation that you don't just spot them, you're going to do something about them.
Yeah. There's a responsiveness to this. a fast responsiveness that you're talking about, Antonia.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. It also means upping your game when it comes to problem solving, in the moment problem solving. So putting yourself in circumstances or situations where you need to be a good tactician. So coming up with good solutions to, like finding yourself in situations where you have to watch yourself kind of navigate through and problem solve as you're doing it. It's like it's experiential problem solving, if that makes sense, with practical solutions. So the easiest way to explain that would be, something like rock climbing. Not that everybody who's an ESTP is into rock climbing. I'm just using this almost like an analogy. But rock climbing is one of those circumstances and situations where you need to be vigilant in order to solve the problems on how you're going to get to the top. So you have to be aware, you have to be sensitive to the situation, you have to understand that there might be danger involved here. But at the same time, you're the person who's navigating your way up this cliff face. And take that same principle and apply it to all of life. It's a matter of being tuned into your environment and your surroundings, being tuned into the opportunities, being tuned into how you're going to overcome those moments, right? Moment to moment. And I saw this expressed in my dad, who had ESTP preferences in marketing. He was a marketing executive, and he was very attuned to like just subtle things, like subtle trends. He always just had his finger on the pulse of what was like what he called a loss lead, or what's called a loss lead, which is what are the kinds of products that we're going to encourage people to come into the store to purchase because we're going to massively mark them down. And he just really had his finger on the pulse of those kinds of things. He was always scanning for not just strategic, but also tactical ways to get people to, to encourage them to come into stores and do what marketing execs are trying to get you to do, which is buy stuff.
Well, he did this through observing behavior. He would watch what people did. He wouldn't try to abstract like, okay, what are they thinking? What would they really desire in their heart of hearts? He just watched their behavior and went, oh, well, that's what they're doing. That must be what they want. Let me go ahead and meet that now.
Exactly. And he was usually dead on right, actually. Yeah. He was very good at it. And then having high expectations is also having a sense of adventure. It's seeking new experiences, seeking new cuisine, seeking novelty, putting yourself in the path of things that are outside of your usual day to day. And in fact, when people with ESTP preferences don't do this, when they don't seek enough novelty, usually they get pretty dysthymic. They get kind of humdrum life. And you can see the whole energy going down. So taking life by the horns, giving yourself permission to do that. That's setting high expectations for yourself.
I think also there's this notion, and again, I alluded to, sit down, stop touching that, stop being so active. I think you get the message also as an ESTP, the sensation part of you has to be channeled in a digital or contained way. And I think that on one hand, that could be really powerful. You channel it into sports or some type of a discipline. And in a way that can help you understand more about how this function can work. So you could learn something like culinary arts. You could tune it to being a chef. You could attune it toward being, an actor. You could attune it to being a first responder or an athlete or anything like that. We have a client of ours who was really good at parkour and developed this part of themselves. And now they're a little older and now they're working on becoming proficient in ballet. And he's reporting this really helps, shape and tune up this part of himself, the sensation part. But the challenge is there's also a lot of things that aren't inside of container or disciplines, right? When was the last time you climbed a tree? Now, you as an ESTP, you might respond more than most people. Most people climbed a tree when I was 7 was the last time I climbed it, or 14 or something. But there's this element of our world. We don't go up, we climb up steps that are exactly spaced for each other. We walk across flat surfaces. There's no struggle for our physical environment. We don't have to stretch our bodies just to do basic things anymore, like our ancestors did, maybe climbing on boulders and doing all these things. But I think there's a wisdom and a genius to this. That's not just in the traditional, climbing a tree. There's no sport in that. That's just a free, playful thing. Same thing with parkour. I guess parkour even has more discipline than tree climbing. There's a bunch of things available to you, especially maybe if you're older and you've lost this part of yourself. Maybe it was when you were a child, you did it more, But again, when was the last time you climbed a tree, as an example? When was the last time you just explored physically in an environment? There was no actual path cut and you did it anyway. You just tramped right through where you needed to be. This, I think, has more capacity for you. This idea of just free play in your environment and space, and maybe taking it to extremes like setting up your space to speak to this part of yourself. Like one idea I had for people of this type potentially is replace the stairs in your homes with boulders. I know that's crazy, but what if you, like, I'm serious. Like, what if you had to like navigate a more treacherous or challenging path just to get around your living space, your habitat? It would give enrichment to this part of yourself. Now that's a dumb idea or abstract idea, whatever. It was like, that's ridiculous. That's not practical.
Yeah. Well, it's a very extroverted intuition or exploration idea.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. But the point is, we have much more in our environment that we could be attuned to than we're allowed to socially, or we give ourselves permission to, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a ton of capacity for ESTPs with this sensation function in relation to that, the things that aren't necessarily societally accepted.
Right. Well, I want to go back to what you talked about at the beginning when we first started discussing this function, when I said that it's all green lights, and you gave me pushback and said that, well, that might not be their experience with the people in their life growing up, or they might have had parents or teachers or, mentors, people who are highly influential that have told them to be quiet, sit down, don't be too energetic, throttle yourself. And so when you get those kinds of messages, part of setting high expectations for this function is overcoming that messaging.
Yeah.
Right? It's giving yourself permission to use this function to its highest capacity, to push yourself, recognizing that other people may not necessarily approve or maybe judge. I don't even think it's a lack of approval. I think most people just kind of get uncomfortable because they don't have that same sense of certainty. It feels, a lot of these things feel like playing fast and loose or a little dangerous. And I don't even mean like physically dangerous. I mean, like, it feels dangerous to just go approach somebody and say hi to them, even if you don't know them very well. Or it feels dangerous to jump on an opportunity or move across the country for a job or like fall in love quickly, or any of the things that you might have an impulse to do. That feels dangerous to a more tempered life.
Yeah.
So part of building having high expectations is doing what you need to do to overcome this messaging that somehow this function is unacceptable.
Well, I think the principle here is our world is so procedural and paperwork focused. I mean, this is the plight of my life. This is the challenge of my life. That a person who is used to, or wired for, I should say, ESTP, that's wired for direct action. Like, well, I need to get to that side of the street. There's no clear crosswalk, so I'm just going to cross this freeway to get over there. Oh my gosh, there's a procedure. You have to go way down, a mile down there and do the proper crosswalk. Maybe that situation would be good to do that so you don't get killed like Frogger on the freeway.
Maybe, or maybe it's really actually not that dangerous and it's totally fine to jaywalk.
But everybody believes that procedure is always the best way to do something.
Right.
And I think the wisdom that sensation has, particularly in the driver function with ESTP at the helm, is that no, there's a lot more direct action, authority in my life and direct action I can take than having to go through the procedure of something. Mm-hmm. This is where capacity be increased, and damn the torpedoes, let the chips fall where they may. I think that ESTPs that do this feel a sense of aliveness, and they don't feel throttled by all that paperwork or procedure that they feel obligated to have to go through sometimes.
Well, I think what it is, and not to let the bull run rampant, but I think there's a distinction here, and setting high expectations for this function means figuring this distinction out. But that is, there's a difference between suppressing your impulses and controlling your impulses. And there does need to be, everybody needs to learn impulse control.
Channeling.
That's right. Like we
channel your energy.
And we all have, with our driver function, we all have a lot of power represented there. Yeah. It's just power in different, fields or elements of life, or they're just all different traits and capacities and skills. All of us have a lot of power in our driver function. And we all need to learn to use it with elegance. And for extroverted sensing or sensation, it's a very generative function. So it comes with a lot of energy. And because of that, and because it is instinct driven and it jumps and it's, like we're talking about things like spot opportunities and go for them, live the life you want to live. Don't necessarily follow somebody else's template. It could sound like an encouragement to be impulsive, right? Or maybe even overindulgent. But it's not about giving yourself permission to do whatever you want to, whenever you want to. It's giving yourself permission to not have to suppress this part of you to mimic being like everybody else.
That's right.
And so that's the high expectation is figuring out how to do it right, figuring out how to give yourself a sense of aliveness, give yourself a sense of, taking the bull by the horns of life and sucking the marrow and enjoyment and having a sense of pleasure and joie de vivre, but also hard work and determination and maybe an entrepreneurial spirit, or maybe just something that's creative, or maybe just something that's, pursues novelty, or whatever it is, whatever it is that gives you that sense of aliveness, because it's going to change from person to person. But giving yourself permission to do that while at the same time, not over throttling because you're trying to do it the way that everybody else told you to do it. It's like you have to figure out how to do these things your own way. And setting high expectations or having high expectations isn't just doing the thing, it's overcoming the messaging around the thing.
Yeah. So do you have any more to talk about in this driver? Because I do want to move to the co-pilot.
I'm not sure how much I touched on it, but just remembering that new experiences are very important. So don't throttle novelty, don't throttle new experiences. Give yourself permission to have plenty of them. And remember that your body is the instrument that goes through all of this. I know we touched on that, or actually talked a lot about it, but high expectations is making sure that you're honoring that instrument. So, so don't did I talk about my father eating a bowl of ice cream before bed every night?
Yes.
I don't know if I talked about that around, but anyway, he had ESTP preferences. I don't know if he was honoring the temple that is the body.
Yeah.
But it's just because something tastes good or feels good doesn't mean it's like the right thing for you. So just that's part of getting that balance,
Absolutely.
getting that balance right.
And in the framework of self-love, the whole point of this is if you know you can do more with your sensation process as an ESTP, but you're not doing that, you might erode a sense of self-love. You're going to have a messy relationship with yourself. Because I got more capacity here, but I'm not rising to the occasion of what's possible for me.
Right.
You mentioned something about really getting clear on distinctions, which I thought is interesting because you, like an ESTP, Antonia, as an ENTP, you share a co-pilot with ESTPs. So the co-pilot for you as an ESTP, we're going to move on to that position in the car model of your personality, technically called introverted thinking. We've nicknamed it accuracy. And as you can imagine, this part of you is interested in getting accurate numbers, accurate data, accurate logic. It's looking for truth. It's looking for what makes sense. And it's really good if you can hone this part of yourself. It's really good at creating distinctions and really understanding things at their core component or principled level. And so when you said, getting clear on what those distinctions are, really you're speaking from this part of yourself, Antonia, and this is available to ESTPs as well. You have the ability to not only spot what is logical, consistent for yourself, but also for other people, and to see where people's logic is off, where they're weighing too many of their emotions maybe, or too much of, other information that's not accurate information. So this also allows you a little bit of space from people. It can be dispassionate and it can be depersonalized, not only from other people. It has the ability to disassociate or get away from the self. So any of the internal biases or anything you're bringing to the table, it has a pretty good process for getting away from those and really seeing truth for what it is, or information for what it is, in an accurate way. I have a story when I was a kid. I am not an accuracy user, but I remember in grade school, and I can only imagine for people that use accuracy, this is more painful because this happens all the time. I remember I was telling one of my fellow grade school students something about Coca-Cola. And I remember telling them, I think it was like 8. I'm like, Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it. And teacher comes over, absolutely, Joel, what are you talking about? That is completely untrue. That is not true. Why are you telling lies? Like, Where did you hear that? Well, I heard it from my parents, but now I'm terrified that I'm telling lies and I'm being inaccurate with my information. But I know I was right because my mom told me this and she showed me where it was from like an encyclopedia when I was a kid. And I remember this is always what I think about when I think about accuracy, because that was just a moment where I was sharing a piece of truthful information with another person, and someone that probably was triggered by the fact an 8-year-old was using the word cocaine, I'm sure is probably what was going on. They're like, had to disrupt this dynamic. I don't remember the person. I don't remember them clearly. I just remember the interaction and feeling so humiliated and belittled about my information. And so every time I think about this accuracy process, I think, that was me as a little kid. I didn't have the wherewithal to be like, no, it's actually true and look it up and prove it. I just backed away and I just took it. But I can imagine an accuracy person, an ESTP going through the world with this process, having this experience all the time, even as an adult. You say, here's the truthful thing. No, that's not true. You can't know that. That's not logical. And what? Right? It can be frustrating, I think. So I want to create some empathy for ESTPs that have this part of them, because if you go through the world, most of the rest of us are very emotional in how we process information compared to UTP types.
Well, I will say this.
That was a long story for, I don't know. Is that helpful at all? I don't even know.
I think it does create some empathy, because I think most people have had an experience like that. And to know that there are certain personality types that are wired that way, where it's compulsive and they can't stop it.
Yeah.
That does, I think, create some empathy. But that said, I want to talk about the expectations that an ESTP should be setting for this function. And there is a part of it, which is overcoming the messaging from the outside world that you're sharing information you shouldn't be sharing. In that situation, you even read, I'm an 8-year-old that's saying the word cocaine. That's probably the problem. And there's a sense of embarrassment and self-consciousness.
But I wasn't wrong.
But you weren't wrong. Exactly.
She told me I was. I was really mad. I'm still mad about it.
Still mad.
I wish I knew who it was. I could track her down and tell her.
Well, setting high expectations for this function isn't just asserting correct information. It's actually getting really precise and articulate. There are quite a few things that this function can give to people with ESTP preferences. There's lots of gifts if they set a high expectation for themselves. One of them is being able to communicate thought and express you talked about it being logically consistent and congruent, to be able to express those things. One is being radically honest in a situation, where somebody's got to call out that the emperor doesn't have clothes on. And it's usually some people who use introverted thinking.
Or do I look fat in this outfit?
Right.
Or do I look whatever in this outfit?
Now, to set high expectations isn't to simply follow the impulse to say yes if the truth is yes. It's being able to communicate and express complete truths. And that means that the way to get to that place, it's not just doing it, it's actually mastering the process of thought. It's taking an opinion, maybe one of your own, and not just believing. There's a phrase called don't believe everything you think. And that is what setting high expectations for introverted thinking boils down to. It's not believing everything you think on the first pass. You have to drill down further. You have to spot all of the inconsistencies and biases within it. It's a matter of doing the math, the thought labor of ensuring that your opinions are not simply borrowed from others. They're not just culturally expected of you, that they're not outsourced, that these are things that actually line up for you as an individual. And that means that sometimes you don't have opinions on certain things because you haven't figured it out yet. It's being willing to pause. If you haven't actually come to a conclusion on something, you wait until you've done sufficient thought labor to get to a point where you have. And it all has to line up internally. So setting high expectations is not believing everything you think. It's drilling down deeper. It's going further. It's really determining whether something makes sense to you as a person who is, like you said, disassociating from the self to not bring personal biases in. And not needing to be right, not needing to have come to the right conclusion so you can out-argue others. It's coming to the right conclusion because that's how you make your best decisions, is through this logical analysis. So setting high expectations means making sure that you have rigor in your thought, making sure that you aren't just filled with opinions, but you're filled with the sort of the math underneath the opinion, and not having an opinion if you haven't completed that process.
Another thing about accuracy and this function, this is a place for the ESTP to create a lot of competence, focus, discipline, mastery. And, there's competitive sports and competitive things in the world, but this is really a competition with the self. And one could say, well, how does that relate to self-love? It's like, well, if you're competing with yourself and always refining your numbers and getting better, it's almost like, I like to look at golf as an example of this. Like, golf is not, you are competing with other people, but ultimately you're the one that's 100% in control of your performance. Like, no one else influences that. It's not a team sport. So you're in a self-competition to continually improve your abilities. That's just apply it to everything in your life as an ESTP. Like, you have the ability to now look at something, create a metric around it, and be better at it and create focus around it. And I think this starts to open up channels of self-love. You're like, man, look at what I'm doing. Look how good I'm getting at this. I'm world class and I'm getting better every day. I'm challenging myself. I'm growing. I'm getting this down. And I think just self-love floods into an ESTP that's doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, you're watching yourself improve over time and building self-confidence as you get better and better. But it requires setting a high expectation of focus and discipline. So I think that element of competing with the self and having a high standard of where you want to go, just refining. I think that's definitely something that builds up an ESTP's self-confidence.
So one of the things that we talk about when growing the Copilot for accuracy, and Antonia, you've really taken this on in your life because, again, you share the same function. Where am I lying to myself? Mm-hmm. Where am I being self-deceptive? And I think that's the self-competition of your own thought, to say, I need to be very honest with how I'm thinking about this, at least for the self. Maybe you don't have to share it, but you need to be honest with yourself from this part of yourself as an ESTP. And if you do, again, you're going to have much more capacity for self-love in this too.
Yeah. One final note that I want to state around this function is, so if you reference, and we've been talking about this in the other episodes as well, if you reference Dr. John Beebe's 8-function model, there's certain archetypal energies that are associated with each of these functions. And he applies to the Copilot or auxiliary function the energy of parent. It's got a parental energy to it. And that means that part of showing your self-love is contributing with this function to other people. Now, parents contribute thanklessly to their children. And so there's not a lot of expectation for positive return necessarily. So if you do parent with this function, it doesn't mean that you're expecting everybody to thank you all the time. You're going to feel good when you give this just because you get intrinsic reward for sharing. So how does somebody share or parent, quote unquote, or contribute with an introverted function like introverted thinking or accuracy? So take some of the things we've already talked about and now think of yourself as a model for them. So the first thing we discussed was being logically congruent with your thoughts, not sharing opinions until they're well thought out. But one of the things that this function affords ESTPs is a sort of an open-mindedness, because we're all figuring it out and it takes a while for us to figure it out. So being willing to share opinions that aren't necessarily complete yet, being willing to play around with an idea, to share something that's honest for you, even if it would be offensive to others. It's basically creating a context where people can say anything to you and you can help shepherd their thoughts. You can help them refine how they're thinking about it. That's one way that you can share it in a parental energy, because there's a lot of people who would love to share their honest opinions, but they don't have anybody to talk to. It seems like everybody's triggered by everything. And so being willing to hold space for people's thought processes, knowing that they're in the middle of something, that they're not sharing something that that is complete for them and they'll never let go of, but rather things that they're working on and different ways of looking at it that might be triggering to people who are not you. So that's one way it can be a parental energy.
Yeah.
Another way is by modeling what you're talking about, Joel, that desire to improve, that desire to self-compete and continue to become better, more accurate, more precise. Parental energy isn't just nurturing, it's also modeling. And so showing what you're capable of, what people are capable of by being disciplined, by being focused, by being willing to do hard things, be not just indulgent, but like driven.
Yeah.
These are all things that are available to this function and can be modeled to other people so that they trust you. They trust your information. They trust your process. They trust how you do things. And weirdly enough, I mean, there are people who with ESTP preferences that maybe a theoretical understanding of type wouldn't lead people to this conclusion. But a lot of ESTPs say that they're the person that other people go to talk, to like really share themselves with, because they're a safe person to discuss ideas with without being judged.
We will be right back. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity, because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.
Now back to the show. People judge neutral things all the time, don't they? And so it's refreshing to be able to talk with somebody that's just going to take you at face value of what you're saying at the data level, at the information level, and not project a bunch of other things onto it. Now, not that ESTPs can't do that, because everybody's, human. We have all those elements in us. And speaking to that, let's talk about the 10-year-old.
Yes.
Because this is where the problem zone starts to enter for ESTPs.
Right.
And when I say problem zone, I don't mean this is a bad part of you. This is a fantastic part of you. Extroverted feeling, harmony. That's the process here at 10-year-old. And this is, again, focused on people and the dynamics of people. People are not very logical. People, writ large, are not very logical, right? We're especially the more we get together in groups, we start to vibe with each other. And logic and thought actually ruins the moment. And just imagine, like at a party or something where you're like, woo, the music is pumping and people are in a vibe, maybe dancing or partying or having a good time. This is an example. And someone comes up and gives a really hard fact about the situation or depth of information. It's like, you're a buzzkill, man. I don't want to hear this right now. I'm having fun. I'm vibing with the people around me. I'm in a human moment. I don't want deep thinking in this space.
Well, and I think also, and this is where an ESTP has to make sure they have a high standard for introverted thinking, that they don't end up in the vibe of being gossipy. And so if somebody shared an opinion with you and shared a thought with you, you wouldn't just share it with other people.
Yeah.
Right? You wouldn't reveal it to others as part of like a social ecosystem thing.
Yeah, because information can be a currency in that world.
That's
right?
exactly
It's a way that I can vibe with another person. The currency, it's like a throwaway. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm just using this information to connect with another.
Right. And
because this is such a important part of you as an ESTP, and the rest of the world really does need a lot of interfacing, this gets pulled upon a lot in your work, in your school, in your life, in your family. If you're a parent, like it doesn't matter what station of life you're on, society will reward you for showing up with this part of yourself.
Yeah.
It will demand it. It will expect it. And it will try to control how you express this part of yourself too. That can be challenging for an ESTP because you're good enough that you can play the game often. Like you understand this enough. You could play the game. But in some ways, you might be eroding self-love because if you play the game too much at the cost of your own internal logic or your sense of self or what you really believe or think, Well, now you're going to create obstructions for self-love. And that's where the challenge enters.
Right. So this is the first time we've gotten into uncertain territory.
Yeah.
The driver and co-pilot are both functions that lean on a sense of certainty. But this is the first time we feel uncertain. In the same model where we apply the energy of parenting or a parental energy to the co-pilot, that same model says that this is an energy of an eternal child. And so it's uncertain in a childlike way. And so it tends to seek certainty by getting head pats from the outside world. So it's a social function that seeks social approval. And so it's almost like
ESTPs.
Particularly for ESTPs. That's right. All people's 10-year-old or eternal child energy looks for approval. But this one is especially looking for approval through social circles.
So let me just say, just make sure I understand this. Both the function looks for approval, extroverted feeling harmony, no matter where it is in someone's cognition. And the position of the 10-year-old also looks for approval, positionally, no matter what functions in the 10-year-old position.
Right.
So combining those two is a double whammy for ESTPs.
Exactly. And when extroverted feeling or harmony is like a driver function, it understands approval and disapproval. It doesn't need other people's approval to give it permission to go do the thing it's going to do, but it's always tapped into whether or not people are approving of each other. So it is tapped into approval. But when it becomes an eternal child, or when it's in the 10-year-old position, it means it's seeking approval. And so then it's a little at war, like you said, with the co-pilot, because the co-pilot isn't looking for approval at all. It's looking for what's true, right? It's looking for honesty. It's willing to be candid and to be honest and to share things that are not approved of. But this function very much is seeking approval. So as an uncertain function, it tries to calm down that sense of uncertainty by looking for the outside world, by other people to give it pats on the heads. So you have to be a little careful. You have to set your expectations. You have to have reasonable expectations for this part of you. It's never going to get to the level that you would like it to in order to feel as self-possessed as you do with your other two functions. And you also have to sort of learn the dynamic of how to not hand over too much power to other people because of what we talked about, that sort of double whammy around approval. So let's first talk about what are reasonable expectations for this function for an ESTP, and then how they can get around that trap of seeking approval from others. So like you talked about, this is a function that's tuned into the social ecosystem because it's really about understanding the energetic interchange between humans. You could call it a vibe. People whenever they get in, everybody has an energetic signature. And when they get into the proximity to another person, those energies then start to pass back and forth. And that's another word for it is just rapport. When you get into rapport with a person, you're sending them energy and they're sending energy back. So this is a function that's really attuned and in tune with rapport. Now, if you take rapport on a mass scale, that becomes social ecosystem. It becomes culture effectively. Like a culture is basically a whole bunch of people in rapport with each other on certain topics.
Well, shaking hands is like a codified way of creating rapport with another human.
Exactly. And so knowing that that's really what it's tuned into, and then being sensitive to other people's emotions, if you're in rapport with another person, how they feel is going to impact you because you're sending them energy and they're sending energy back to you. And a bit of their emotion or feeling is going to, you're going to be receiving that on your side. And it can be distressing if somebody else feels really awful or they feel terrible or they're not in a good way. That feels bad, right? Because now their energy or their feeling is inside of you. And so that's why the function has a tendency to focus on getting people's needs met, because it wants people to be in a good space, because it's slurping up their energy. It's slurping up their feelings. So, based on all of that, here are reasonable expectations for an ESTP with this function. The first one is sort of understanding how socializing works, right? Like understanding rapport, understanding how to be in group dynamics, understanding how to be a contributing member of group dynamics. That's all very reasonable. It's reasonable to believe that you can pick up etiquette, right? Like what's expected, what is the socially expected thing, and that you can show up in a way that isn't offensive to other people, that you can get that dynamic down. And in fact, the more you do that, it doesn't necessarily rob from introverted thinking or accuracy. It actually beautifies it. It helps build charisma. It helps sell ideas. It helps say things that might be difficult truths in a way that another person can receive them because you've got your finger on the pulse of how it's going to make them feel.
Yeah.
So it's actually a really nice function to be able to tap into, particularly as a counterweight or counterpart to that more incisive, direct, radically honest part of you. So that's all reasonable to believe that, you can have friends and you can be in rapport with people and you can have relationships and you can have good relationships, that you can be an individual that helps, teams and tribes and family ecosystems, you can help sort of be a glue in all of that. That's all very reasonable.
Yeah.
What's unreasonable is that you can do all of that heavy lift while suppressing your true thoughts. So it's unreasonable to believe that it's your job to maintain harmony in all situations and circumstances, and that you will be able to do so without feeling self-betrayal. So it shouldn't all fall on your shoulders. You should not be sacrificing, say, your introverted thinking or accuracy in behalf of making sure everybody's okay. That is an unreasonable ask of this part of who you are, because it wouldn't be able to do it anyway. It doesn't have the sophistication to ensure that everybody's needs are met at all times. It doesn't have the ability to monitor all those things. And honestly, it would lose interest at a certain point. Like, you might be able to get everybody together, right, and have a party, and you might even be able to start a club or something. But you being the one person who ensures that everybody is showing up every week, or you're the one person who's taking care of whatever this tribe is, that might be too much for this part of who you are.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is transplanting culture that resonates with you. I've seen some younger ESTPs that still have to work on their maturity, getting used to a certain culture, maybe in a particular town or environment, and then assuming they have enough strength with this function to project and create that culture in a different scenario, and almost confused why everybody's not synced up. Like, when I say culture, I don't mean like your country or your society's culture. I mean like a specific subgroup culture. Right. Like, at this office, we did this, and then assuming that it's going to translate to another environment one-to-one,
right? And
then being a little bit like, wait, that's not working, and then trying to force the issue and force that culture over to another environment. Sometimes that can show up for ESTPs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Or feeling responsible for recreating those kinds of things.
Exactly.
And I think it's also unreasonable to believe that you're going to be able to be constantly socializing. Like, if your calendar is always full, you desperately need alone time. It's really important for people with ESTP preferences to get plenty of alone time to do the thought labor we were talking about with introverted thinking or accuracy. And it's unreasonable to believe that you will always be able to match other people's interests. Like, say, if you're partnered and your partner is really into a bunch of stuff and wants you to be interested in their thing, but they're not interested in your thing, it's unreasonable to believe that you'll always be able to just go along with whatever their interests are without building resentment. So it's really I guess if you put it down to its core, it's unreasonable to believe that you can always be in a giving position, right? That's not sustainable. And one thing we didn't talk about with introverted thinking, and I think this is particularly, something that helps people of ESTP preferences do the thing we were talking about before, which is like impulse control as opposed to impulse repression. Introverted thinking or accuracy is where you build your principles, your core principles, and it's how you tap into what is right for you, true and moral and ethical for you. But it's not based on what feels right. It's based on how it all kind of rolls out, like how the math rolls out. Like, this makes sense to me. This is a hill I'll die on. I won't die on many hills, but I'll die on this one, because this one, you got to have this one. And if you don't, the whole structure falls. And that gives you a sense of core principles, not ethics that are based on, emotional criteria, but ethics that are based on logic. And when your extroverted feeling tries really hard to match up with the people in your life, sometimes it believes that it can start compromising those core principles in behalf of relationships, and it believes that that's sustainable. But unfortunately, all it does is erode your self-esteem. So it's an unreasonable expectation that you will be able to hand over those kinds of things to other people, that you'll be able to outsource all of your principles. You need to have those in-house. You have to have high expectations for figuring out what your core principles are. And you need to have reasonable expectations about your ability to compromise them in behalf of relationships.
I think the biggest measurement here is when you feel resentment, anger, or frustration, because this process also helps you set good boundaries as an ESTP. I think this helps you with social boundaries and know that you're not going to be excellent at it, but it is going to give you a sense of like where you stop and where somebody else begins. And what you're talking about, Antonia, is weak boundaries that might build resentment over time that can erode self-love. Because let's say your partner is telling you how you have to think and behave, and you're going along because you're in a relationship with them and you want the vibe, you want to feel good when you're with this person,
right? But
they're demanding and you just like, that doesn't make sense. Like you're asking me something that doesn't line up. I don't feel like, or I don't think that is congruent with my thought process or core principles. I'm only doing it for you. But eventually it's like, you're going to hit this threshold where you're like, I just can't abide by this anymore.
Yeah.
It's a problem. And then it might be a blow up or an anger or frustration or resentment that you didn't resolve that festers and ruins a relationship. The same thing happens with the self. You have boundaries for yourself and disciplines for yourself for your own relationship that you also need to honor. So that example with a partner, that's an easy one to see, because if you have that dynamic going, you're like, oh, okay, I guess I can stop that or fix that. But with yourself, it's a little more insidious. Are your boundaries weak with your own sense of self? Are you allowing yourself to be handed over to whatever, and you're not staying true to what you think and believe?
Right.
And that's really important.
Right. So another way of saying what you're saying, Joel, is that that part of you, that eternal child, 10-year-old part that is seeking approval, you've got to bring the approval seeking in-house.
That's right.
Right. You can't just hand it to other people and go, did I do okay? Am I doing okay in relationships? Am I supportive enough? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Or whatever the questions might be. All of those can be answered better with introverted thinking or accuracy as a parent. So it's like the child is looking to the parent to help them determine whether or not they're doing a good job.
Within the self.
Within the self. That's right. Exactly. And when you do that, kind of think of these cognitive functions as two sides of the same coin. Introverted thinking accuracy and extroverted feeling harmony are two sides of the same coin. So when one is up, the other one is usually down, and vice versa. When you're in your like cold hard fact mode, right? When you're like doing all this thought labor and focusing and disciplining, and you're concentrating and you're trying to figure something out or problem solve or whatever, the vibe part of you, the like sort of human-y relationship, fun vibe part is, or even nurturing part is usually flipped down. That's why when people disrupt you from those moments, it can be infuriating. And the opposite holds true. Like when you're in that vibing with another person or relationship energy, and it doesn't even have to be fun when maybe you're in a fight with somebody, right? But you're still in rapport with them. You're in an energetic interchange with them. It's hard to think, right? It's hard to like access that thinking part. But if you spin the coin, now you can't see which one's heads or tails. A spinning coin becomes something else. It's almost like a different thing than it originally started out as. And that's what they call a transcendent function. So if you can learn a way to get your introverted thinking accuracy and your extroverted feeling harmony to work in tandem with each other, to almost be spinning, so you can't tell where one ends and the other one begins, now you have a capacity for contribution that really, really feels like that you're showing up, right? You're showing up the way that you're supposed to be showing up. So that looks like delivering difficult information and truths in a loving manner where a person can receive it. It means having good boundaries and not letting other people, take advantage. But at the same time, also giving where you can give and not being cold or distant or cut off. It's sort of a thing of beauty when these two functions start to work in tandem with each other.
Yeah.
And it particularly shows up in moments of trying to get other people's needs met, while recognizing that what most people need isn't indulgent, right? Like sometimes people need to learn harsh lessons, and that means the best thing you can do is to not not give them something they want, right? But that takes discretion. It takes the ability to kind of read a situation better, to not just have your emotions make you want to help them. Yeah. That impulse means, yes, I do want to help, but then I have to pause and go, but what actually does the person truly need?
Yeah.
And what they truly need is sometimes, kindness, not niceness.
Yeah.
Right. Like they need to figure something out on their own, or they need to get that difficult feedback or whatever it is, a constructive criticism. And you're able to communicate that in a way where they can receive it, or maybe they can't, but that's their lesson to learn.
Yeah. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of this, but you reflected to me, your father has ESTP preferences, and he, from this part of himself, this harmony part, has a lot of compassion. He took care of his mother well into her older years. He was the one that stepped up with the compassion to do so. Even though you report your grandmother, his mother, wasn't a really great person. Like she had, I don't want to give the specific diagnosis, but she
was neglectful to the point of abuse.
Exactly. When he was a child, but he still stepped up this compassion, but he had really strong boundaries. Mm-hmm. He knew where he stopped and where she started. He didn't just hand himself over and let her jerk his chain around all the time. But he had compassion for her late into life, even though she caused problems for him by spreading untruths that were deeply painful, that instead of going and correcting them, he let them stand. He had maturity enough to let it stand and just keep caretaking. And then eventually those untruths, the people that were told to, they realized, oh, I see what's going on.
Meaning that he would help her out and then she would lie to people and say he wasn't.
Exactly.
Right.
And so it could be deeply painful, but he had a sense of himself. He was older as well because he's taking care of an elderly mother. But I think that's an example of an ESTP. It's got compassion, but they don't just hand themselves over. They still have the compassion, though. I think that's really the capacity here. And I think that is an ESTP that has opened up a channel of self-love. I'm sure your father felt good about the fact he didn't just hand himself over, but he still took care of business and helped his mother.
Well, and that was a principle of his, was to take care of his parents when they were elderly.
One of the core principles.
And so regardless of whether or not she was grateful, he was going to continue to do it because he was going to be in alignment with his core principles.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump over to the 3-year-old now. Sitting behind the driver is a 3-year-old process that we nickname perspectives, technical introverted intuition. Let's talk about this. What are the expectations? 3-year-old maturity, or 3-year-old certainty, I should say. You might have skill and capacity here. That's the key, right? Just like with a 10-year-old, you might have built competence, skill, capacity. Maybe if your job, it's a very abstract, imaginative job that you have to perform. And so you're in this process potentially a lot, right? Maybe you are in the healing arts. Maybe you're a therapist or a psychologist as an ESTP or another type, but it doesn't mean that you can't build skill here or be proficient at this part of yourself. It just means that no matter how proficient you are, you're never going to escape the uncertainty that you feel here.
Right. So as opposed to the eternal child, which will look to other people to help calm down that sense of uncertainty through, getting approval, the 3-year-old function doesn't have the capacity to do that. It doesn't matter who tells you you're good at it. It doesn't matter how much feedback you get. You still are going to feel deeply uncertain. So deep uncertainty is what throttles the ability to build the skill, because when you feel deeply uncertain, you move slower. You do things more carefully. You don't put yourself in high stakes situations. You just throttle everything. And so because of that, you're going to have to set reasonable expectations for this function. So as you mentioned, it's a deeply imaginative function. It's introverted intuition. And introverted intuition could be seen as basically world building. It's kind of like taking everything that you experience in real life in the outside world and bringing it all in and using your imagination to live through those things. Solve problems in there, future cast, shift into other people's perspectives, like you mentioned before. And what is shifting into another person's perspective, but imagining what life must be like for them, not in terms of sympathy, but in terms of like, what is their paradigm? What is their belief? How are they seeing the world? So there is a capacity for that, and reasonable expectations do not preclude the ability to do this for people with ESTP preferences. And in fact, a reasonable expectation is that you might actually be really interested in things like psychology. You might be really interested in futurism and technologies coming down the pike.
I remember one of our PT students, profile training students, Marco, ESTP preferences. He talks about, I think he's German. He talks about going to this medicine doctor in Germany. He's like, I don't know what's happening. but he has like this little shaker of teeth and these bones, and he like brings me into the clinic, and I had this problem with my teeth or something, and he like shakes it, and then he could tell me what's wrong with my physical body. And it's like magic. I have no idea what's happening, but I believe it because when he says it and I go to the other real doctor, whatever,
the dentist,
and they do the x-rays, like they prove that this guy was right. And it's amazing. I don't know what's going on, but he's like fascinated by that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I think that's what you're speaking to. It's like a fascination. He doesn't totally understand it or fully believe it or rest into it.
Right. Well, he's uncertain.
But there's something there that's interesting, right. And he kind of pursues it often.
Yep, exactly. And so being into those kinds of things, that's okay. Now, the younger you are, the more you're probably thinking that that's woo-woo BS, yeah. Right? But the older you are, and the more you're integrating this part of who you are, you usually kind of get fascinated by stuff like that. You're a little more open than maybe you were when you were younger. And that's a good sign. It's a good sign. It means that you're integrating this part. So that's the expectation. The expectation is that you can integrate more of this. Yeah. And what that means is also, this function, introverted intuition or perspectives, runs simulations into the future. And for people with ESTP preferences, that means keeping your finger on the pulse of implications. How is something going to roll out into the future? How are my actions going to not just impact me in this moment and other people in this moment, but impact things for the long run? And so you have a total capacity to do that. And that's part of the impulse control, by the way, is tapping into implications. How are my actions going to roll out into the future? There's also an ability to do problem solving in there by understanding complexities inside of your mind. Now, this also taps a little bit into introverted thinking or accuracy, which focuses on systemic solutions as well, not just being tactical, but also being strategic. And so this part can tap into even more strategy because strategy is long-term. So ESTPs tend to be brilliant tacticians, but they can also be strategists, and they can get into things like strategic games and gameplay. They can get into, like I mentioned, futurist technologies that are more about like sort of the strategy of how things will roll out. And all of that is totally within the grasp of an ESTP to become fascinated by and then integrate some of the benefits of that more strategic mind. Implications, being able to see things from other people's perspectives. So being able to develop more sympathy, really understanding what's going on for other people, being willing to ask, right? Like, I think this is what's going on for you. That's what I'm reading. Am I right about that? And having some of that ability to do pattern recognition, like not just see the individual trees, but to be able to see the theme, to be able to see the forest.
So we're talking a lot about the aspirational nature of this. I talked about Marco, and you're talking about seeing bigger picture and all of that. Mm-hmm. I would say, though, a reasonable expectation isn't that an ESTP is going to think in terms of, okay, I've got the next 40 years planned.
Right.
I can run the simulation. I know how it's all going to work out. I've got my plan. I'm going to stay on my plan. Right. I think they're much more responsive to the environment and the opportunities presented than having this singular or multi-layered plan for their lives over the long term. Even they might have an ideal for that and desire for it. I don't think that's going to be a good expectation. It's going to erode self-love if you expect that of yourself.
Right. That would be an unreasonable expectation. In fact, I think almost everybody, both of the ESP types, when you think about like a 40-year plan, is something that kind of gives them the heebie-jeebies. They're like, no. So an unreasonable expectation is that you have your next 4 decades lined up, that everything is sewn up, that's what you're going to be doing with your life. Another unreasonable expectation would be that you're the person who's going to come up with some like grand complex theory about some, things like archetypes or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you might be interested, but you're not going to tap into this energy to a point where it is your sole focus.
I think the other thing is holding on to an intuitive pattern in the midst of exceptions. This is an unreasonable expectation. So an intuitive dominant, for example, somebody that, leads with intuition, they can see a pattern and they can stay consistent with that pattern, even if there's like attacks of like the opposite they see. They're like, no, even though that's an anomalous situation or an exception to the rule, the pattern still holds. I can still see the broader pattern. I think with ESTPs, once the exception enters into the pattern they've seen or the picture that they're painting, they go, wait a minute, that exception, that throws everything off. Maybe the pattern isn't even sound anymore. Right. Just one exception can do that.
Yes. And I think, to piggyback off that, I will say that a reasonable expectation is that this function can help them develop patience.
Yeah.
And patience can make it so that if you see an intuitive pattern or have an intuitive pattern in your mind and you see an exception, you can't have patience long enough to see if that was just the one exception or if there's more like it.
Yeah.
Right. So I agree with you. I think it's unreasonable to hold on to patterns where you've got a lot of evidence against them. But that's actually the strength of an ESTP, is that they don't do that, is that they actually are looking for practical application and grounded wisdom.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is holding a pattern when it has no practical application, right? Like to be somebody who holds a bunch of, theories in your head that don't seem to match to reality. Like that's not your job. You're not supposed to be doing that. And then I think finally, being uncomfortable with ambiguity. I think it's unreasonable to expect ESTPs to be comfortable with constant ambiguity. They need to see where the rubber hits the road. And so I don't think, I think putting yourself in a situation where it's always ambiguous and you always kind of have to, intuit your way through. I don't think it's reasonable for an ESTP to believe that they will perform well in that situation.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they can be tapped into transformation. Right. That's a reasonable expectation. Transformation is something that introverted intuition or perspectives really values and really is interested in, is how do things metamorphosize or transform. And that includes the self. So being tapped into gradual transformation over time, I think that is definitely a reasonable expectation for an ESTP.
So let's talk about what the rest of us can learn from ESTPs. As we look at the personality type, let's turn our attention to a broader principle or understanding we can have. So the rest of us, the other 15 types, can also draw something from this. Just quick review. ESTP, we pulled the car model out of our ESTP owner's manual. Driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old, 3-year-old. The driver is sensation, extroverted sensing is its technical name. The co-pilot is accuracy, technical name, introverted thinking. 10-year-old, harmony, extroverted feeling is the technical name. And the 3-year-old is introverted intuition, or we nickname it perspectives. That's the cognition of an ESTP's mind. And we talked about the descending order of certainty, the most certain at the driver, and then it descends all the way down to the 3-year-old. This is the certainty you carry in your personality, and the expectations should follow. Mm-hmm. To create a situation for self-love, if you want a good relationship with yourself, we're sending love freely all the time, but if you want a good relationship with yourself as an ESTP, you'll have high expectations for the 2 front seat functions, moderate or reasonable expectations for the 2 backseat functions.
That's right.
Your 10-year-old and 3-year-old.
Yep.
If you have these in proper order, the proper expectations, and you're rising to the occasion in your life, you're most likely going to open up those channels of self-love. You'll be able to send and receive love in the relationship you have with yourself. So now we want to draw, let's say there's an ESTP that's dialed this in, that's balanced all of this. What is a principle? What's something we can draw from an ESTP that's showing up this way that the rest of us can learn from?
Well, it's more a quality or characteristic we can model from them.
Fantastic.
And just like I talked about a spinning coin with the co-pilot and the 10-year-old, there's also a spinning coin relationship with the driver and 3-year-old. That is extroverted sensing and sensation, or introverted intuition and perspectives, that they can work in tandem with each other as well. And it creates, again, a transcendent function, or a function that's bigger than the sum of its parts, right? Like the whole is better. And when you get these 2 functions working together, you get somebody who's very present and in the moment, right? Very tuned into the situation or context, but can read the meaning of it, that can sort of read what's going on behind the scenes. An example of this, or a practical example, would be reading body language, right? And the ability to correctly interpret what that body language means. So when an ESTP has dialed in the spinning coin version of both their driver 3-year-old and their co-pilot 10-year-old, and so they have the compassion, but the radical honesty, the ability to set good boundaries, but also deliver difficult truths, the ability to do it in a way where other people can receive it, and they're also fully present in a situation. Right, they're still in the experience, but they are seeing the themes of it. They're understanding deeper meaning or hidden meanings, and able to go figure out what's going on for other people. When they have done all of that, they can't help but be in a place of receiving self-love. And so the characteristic that I think they develop and is very impressive to other people is what I'm calling a strategic dynamo. Somebody who comes in with this presence, right? This almost like this energetic signature of presence where they can come in and read a situation at lightning speeds and kind of know what to do about it. So I think of somebody who is able to walk into a boardroom and set really impressive deals, or somebody who's able to show up at a skate park and then just within like 10 or 15 minutes, everybody's surrounding them, sort of cheering them on. Somebody who's able to show up in any situation and take the attention, but not just for themselves, but in behalf of the context itself. And the reason why this is strategic is because they're able to just not only be a dynamo with their energy and, pull that attention, but also start to direct people down a path that's good for them. So this could be, setting up a really good deal, but you're not doing it just to win. You're doing it to create a win-win.
Yeah.
Right. Or you're gathering people together, not just to like have everybody cheer you on because you're doing something impressive, but because you're modeling to them what's possible. And so when an ESTP really develops this sense of self-love by having these reasonable expectations, by setting these high expectations that they're matching and meeting. And so they are not disappointed in themselves at all. But they also have reasonable expectations of the things that still are, like take some patience and time and effort, but they're integrating it into their strengths. There might not be any other type that's as sort of, like friendly, self-possessed, engaging, right? Like fun, interesting, and also fair, right? Fair-minded with a leadership quality that makes people want to model all of those things for themselves.
I mentioned our friend and, former PT student, profile training student, Marco, ESTP preferences. Marco's a really cool guy as an ESTP because I think he demonstrates this strategic dynamo energy. Mm-hmm. First of all, he's very sharp and he just put together well. Like he always dresses so snappy and sharp.
He's amazing.
He has good posture. He moves to the world. In fact, many ESTPs I find, they move to the world like with this command of their physical presence. Mm-hmm. So they're already, you're like, whoa, who's that? Mm-hmm. Like walking by, they seem like they're larger than life often. Marco has that quality. And when he was sharing with me about the whole medicine man thing, right, that I was mentioning earlier, we were sitting, me and I think it was an INFJ, our other friend Logan was sitting there, and the three of us were kind of talking about this at one of our profiler training events. And first of all, Marco really does follow his intuition in a way. He's tuned into the meaning of people and what's going on for them. And so he studied profiler training. He wanted to be able to have that conversation with another person and help them arrive at their best fit type. And then he went even deeper. And his goal, he's working, I think he even took Dr. Dario Nardi's most recent course we offered through our system, Personality Neuroscience Tools of the Future, which is all about both AI, using that in personality types, but also the EEG brain imaging, because we're moving into that area as personality hackers. So watch out for it. It's going to be probably a bigger part. If ever goes well that Joel wants to go well, it's going to be a bigger part of what we do.
Yeah.
So roll the dice on that one. We'll see how it works out. But he took that course too, and he's very tuned into that. And I think he's very much wanting to use that in a very practical way because it's science, technology, it's EEG, brain imaging, but it's tied back to what he learned about profiling and personality types. So now we're able to see how someone's subtype shows up on the EEG readouts, as well as their personality type, and all sorts of growth avenues and information can come from that. It's perfect for an ESTP like him, right? He's tuned into it. He can build competence there. He has the ambition. He wants to take this to other countries, developing countries all over the world, and be able to help people understand themselves using different languages. He's got all these ideas. He's a world traveler. He goes all over Africa and Asia and Europe. And so he's a really cool guy. And I remember sitting there and me and Logan were there, and he was talking about these cocktails and these different cocktail bars in Berlin and how the smell and the taste is woven together. So you smell something, but you're also tasting something different, and it overloads the senses. And it's like this rich experience. And I'm going, man, this is like the most complex, detailed, nuanced version of sensation I've ever encountered with somebody explaining all of this. And he was even trying to do some small scale examples with some of the orange rinds and some of the experiences with the cocktails that were at this place we were meeting. So it was really cool to watch that and this professional strategic dynamo that he brought to the table. I think of him when you use that phrase. He comes to my mind because he's like this example And he's got his particular interests, like whatever you are as an ESTP, your energy signature has your stuff that you're interested in.
Right.
This is what he's interested in. And he was turning it into that strategic dynamo. And I really like that about him. I thought that was really cool to see him that way. And I was impressed. I think he's probably somebody that doesn't struggle with self-love. I bet he has a very direct path to show himself that love.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of ESTPs as having so much variety. And I like when we do episodes on them for people who don't have these preferences to be able to see so much, complexity.
Yeah.
Marco, who's a sharply dressed business person who also is super into cocktails and psychology. My dad, who, he was a chemistry major and then ended up as a marketing executive, and he could do like literally anything. Like for a while there, before he retired, he was just kind of feeling like he needed jobs. So he went and learned how to be a deck builder, like to build decks. And I think he was in his 60s when he did it. He was just like, I'm going to go figure out how to build decks. And so it was just this like capacity. And then we referenced a friend of ours, I think at some point, Jimmy, who's also in one of our programs, Personality Life Path. And he's the person who does parkour, and now he's doing ballet and, all these disciplines. And at the same time, he's a coder, right? He writes code.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of variety here.
Yeah.
And all of these people, I think, they're modeling what it means to transform over time, to become a better person over time with that patience. Yep. And because of that, like you said, they all have this presence. They have this dynamo energy that I think is really inspiring.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start to wrap this up. I want to say that love is a verb.
Yes.
And so be mindful that, and as an ESTP, especially being probably, you lean on the side of action focused. Like you lean on the side of direct action. So showing yourself love means that you do something, right? Love is a verb. It's not just an idea or an abstraction. It's something you act out. It's something you perform. It's something you do. So it's going to be actions you take to show yourself love. True learning equals behavior change. Changing your behavior, changing the way you do things. Taking action to show yourself love is important. So I want to lay that down. Also, I can't speak highly enough of our ESTP owner's manual. All the types have them. All 16 types have one. They're incredible programs. They go way deeper into that car model and all the aspects of it. We just talked about self-love on here, but this talks about career, relationship, self-identity, worldview. Goes way deeper into the co-pilot, how to grow yourself, things are called loops and grips and all sorts of stuff. It's too much for me to even detail what's in there, but it will set you up for life. It will set you up as an ESTP or whatever type you are on the pathway that is going to fit you better than maybe the context or environment you're in right now. Yeah. So I recommend going over to personalityhacker.com, getting yourself the owner's manual for your personality type. It, I believe, will be a game changer for you and potentially could change your life forever. Yeah. While you're there, you've been listening to this conversation, but you haven't had a third microphone. So while you're at personalityhacker.com, getting your owner's manual of personality, be sure to stop by this episode and leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your story below this episode. What's coming up for you? Are you an ESTP? Do you have an ESTP in your life? What's your relationship with some of these things we've talked about? Do you struggle with self-love? Or is it easy to show your self-love? Like, where are you at in that process? We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. First, get your owner's manual for your personality, ESTP or another one. And then second action is leave a comment, a question, or a story right below this episode.
Yeah. I can't believe we made it through this series.
Well, we haven't totally got there yet. Just I'm watching the cameras, make sure nothing shuts off. The truth is, this is our third attempt for this specific episode.
Yeah. If it feels a little rough, it's because we actually had gotten 60% of the way through this episode the first time we started recording, and one of our cameras died. Just shut down. So and we didn't know it hadn't gotten most of the episodes. So we started over from the beginning, and then it happened again, but we caught it faster that time. Yeah. And so we only went back a little bit. So this is kind of like our third iteration. It's been a long one.
I have no idea. This might be like 7 hours, but I don't think it might actually be shorter.
It might be shorter. I have no idea because all the tech is off and like the audio kept going, even though the videos were, I mean, it's just a crazy one, but we made it through a 16-part series with a primer one. So that's 17 episodes.
Yeah.
We made it through this one, which was like, this is our third attempt. And I don't know, I feel pretty proud of ourselves.
We did it. We did another series. And thanks also to our producer and editor, Christian, who edited all this. And big thanks to you, Christian. I know you had a lot of work behind the scenes. You're not in front of the camera. You've been on the show before, but I know you work really hard behind the scenes making this all happen too.
That's right. And this one's a rough one. So thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review, please leave a rating and a review on iTunes. It helps us by giving us an adrenaline shot in the heart to keep going, even when, say, your tech messes up and it's the third time that you're doing the same episode. So if you leave a rating and a review, let's say you've never invested in Personality Hacker in any other way. That's one way that you can invest. You can leave us a rating and review, and that'll really help me out a lot. Yeah. You could be watching us on YouTube. If you are, you can subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when new episodes come out. And you can also leave a comment under this video. I would love to hear from you on YouTube as well. And grab yourself a copy of your owner's manual. Head over to personalityhacker.com and find the owner's manual that is of your personality type, and go get one. Because as Joel mentioned, he can't recommend it highly enough. So go get yourself a copy.
All right. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.
Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first. Because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.